I hope you're ready for some illogic. Last time we went over our semifinals match against Michael and his Route 1 Burbs. Please go check out that video first if you have not done so already, as we went over the team builder and battle in which, spoiler alert, we emerged victorious 5-0 off the back of our Hail Core yet again. Man, that Arctivish has put in work. This time we've got Chad and his still undefeated Seattle Steamrollers. Timestamps are in the description. When we faced off in week 4, it was two good coaches facing off, me 2-1 and him 3-0. After our defeat, we tumbled down to 2-4 before making some transactions that were partially based around beating Chad later, before climbing our way back up to where we are now, 6-4 in the semifinals. Of course, Chad finished 8-0 before dismantling the Cincinnati Incineroar in the quarterfinals. He has been on an absolute tear, bringing mostly the same team every week. Eviolite Chansey with about 4 of 5 moves, Helmet Corviknight, Scarf for boosting item Landorus, and sacking the Volcarona. Volcanion and Rillaboom are about as creative as he gets, but you know what? He's 9-0. Who am I to complain or criticize? Those 6 are his top 6 for a reason, and among the rest, Ninjask, Kling Klang, and Liepard have little to no chance of showing up. I would say the same for Cinccino, but as it turns out, he brought it against me last time, so I guess I can't say no. Frostlass falls outside his top 6, but if there is a mon that could come aside from those, I think it should definitely be Frostlass. It outspeeds all but Zero Aura and Noivern, the latter of which is harshly threatened by it, including something like Ice Shard, and otherwise matches up well with its stabs, hitting big threats like Victini or Noivern super effectively, while also potentially setting up spikes that I don't have the easiest time removing. Definitely annoying, as are the Chansey Corviknight duo. Chad has brought Chansey 9 times, and it has gone down 0 times. That is so impressive, but I think our team is sort of built to handle it, with 7 different taunt users to shut it down and plenty of item removal or manipulation. Still, it's a big blob, and Chad has favored it so much, it's still probably coming despite my trash talk with him. Corviknight is the other half of it, and my 2 top point mons are, well, their stabs are the 2 types that hit Corviknight super effectively, and once again, 7 taunt users make for a good time against him. I think if I had to guess, one of these 2 would be benched for Frostlass, but without one, the other definitely suffers. Maybe it'll be Volcanion, who didn't come last time. It's got reliable stabs against the team, but once again I have so much coverage against it, and actually outspeed it very well between things like Nidoking and Victini and Zero Aura and Noivern, who takes nothing from its stabs. Still, its stats are huge as an optional defogger, plus the burns could be tough to take. The top 3 are terrifying, to say the least. Rillaboom decimated my team last time, hoping I can do a better job preserving answers to it. And I do match up against it much better than last time, especially with Noivern over Latias and Victini over Flareon. Still, Grassy Glide is so strong, and the utility of things like Knockoff and U-Turn cannot be overstated. Volcarona is liable to sweep for sure, even if once again I am better prepared for it overall. A single Quiver Dance lets it outspeed my whole team, and with Roost for longevity and maybe some bulk, it's too much to deal with. The other way goes with raw offensive output, maybe a boosting item that could nuke even without a Quiver Dance. And of course, there's Lando. I ended last match staring it down as the Scarfs that KO'd me, and I've gotten, well, actually worse against it. Ground is my biggest overall weakness probably, and the Genie with 1 more point in base speed than Victini is rough to handle. I anticipated Earthquake and Rock Slide, maybe a boosting move like Swords Dance or Rock Polish, or maybe both. I think a setup set is terrifying, but it's tough to bring a physical wall for this when it has Sludge Wave access and stompers like Volcanion and Volcarona just waiting. On my side, Claydol could actually check Landorus pretty decently, but, well, it still gets U-turned on or knocked off, and things like Volcarona and Volcanion and Rillaboom and Corviknight and Chansey don't care about Claydol, so it cannot come. The Hail Core also struggles here, with Grassy Glide in particular absolutely destroying us. Volcarona walls, Vanillux, Volcanion walls, both hard. Even Chansey doesn't care much about Arctivish, and Corviknight can punish it back too, especially with Rocky Helmet. Tangela has a place, but as mentioned before, it struggles against the faster fire types, as well as Chansey, which can safely teleport out, and Corviknight, which roosts on me all day, plus Frostlass, plus Sludge Wave on Landorus, plus his knockoff users. Finally, Rotom actually almost made it on the team, which could have been pretty funny, honestly. Volt Switch looks pretty great, and Paint Split against Chansey is way too funny. However, it does struggle a bit too much with things like Grassy Glide, strong long Landorus attacks, breaking through a Quiver Dancing Volcarona, the good things he's going to bring. So, last time we faced off, I switched on turn 1 against Landorus, and that ended up costing me the game, so this time we're better prepared. The Shuckleberry is the number 1 thing I'd withheld from my first matchup against Chad, and oh boy did that bite me, or remind me never to keep something back just because we may match up again later. This time with a Shucko, we can stay in and get 2 big hits on Landorus, maybe more if he stays in and clicks rocks. Point is, we won't have another scenario like that again. Probably. Same set as last time, basically, but we've got our first taunt user on the team too to help against Chansey and Corviknight. I think Zero Aura is one of the least likely members for them to stay in on, but it should matter too much, and I'm not losing much of anything by foregoing close combat this time around. Zero Aura is just a good mon, probably a best case scenario we knock off the Lando and proceed to handle it with something, or pressure out of Volcanion or something to that effect. Electric is really nice stab in the matchup, so let's move on to the absolute best stab in the matchup with this amazing Victini set. So I can set up a substitute on a myriad of foes. Rillaboom without a boosting item does not break the sub with Grassy Glide or U-turn. Lando doesn't break with U-turn. Chansey doesn't break with Seismic Toss. We're actually pretty bulky, and substitute is absolutely the truth. Sub up on, say, Chansey or Corviknight. If they stayed in, click Taunt. If they swapped, claim a KO. Only Lando and Volcarona and Frostlash should outspeed us among those we're expecting, and none of those like V-Create at all. Lando is O-code half the time, and max defense Volcarona is KO'd by Bulk Strike into V-Create. Volcanion takes well over half from Bulk Strike, even with max bulk. So that's the idea. I can break through literally anything, and potentially more if I can let the sub stick. What is it with me in Substitute? I love this set, and I have no doubt it will put in the utmost of work, if not straight up win me the game. I at least want to take down Volcarona or Landorus, and at least one other member. If I can manage that, we're probably golden. That idea is enforced well by the next team member, which is Nidoking, who is designed to take out one of Volcarona or Landorus as well. Max HP and max special defense, Rock Slide for Volcarona with no minus attack nature. And on the other side we have Ice Beam plus Chuckaberry to handle Landorus. And that's really the basis of this set. Take out one of the two big threats with other things like Earth Power for Volcanion and our third taunt user, as it cannot touch Chansey or Corviknight otherwise. Don't need speed, I'm not anticipating Volcanion to run any, so this should still be safe. Pretty simple and straightforward, even if my method of arriving at the set may not have been so straightforward. I guess I figured that Nidoking was a little too slow for whatever I was wanting it to do, so I morphed it into a straight killer of his biggest, baddest mons. It has the coverage, so why not? Fitting with the rock coverage theme, it's going to be Cobalion, who has Rocky Helmet one more time, just in case something like Cinccino, and of course rock coverage once again. Our fourth taunt user as well. I figured Cobalion would be an excellent swap into things like Corviknight or Chansey, especially if taunt forces them into helmet recoil without the ability to heal up. Stealth Rock is here, of course. I can taunt any Defogs that may be coming with relative ease and keep the rocks up on the field, and Toxic is the final slot as a way to actually hit things like Lando and Rillaboom with something that can stop their setup parade or get them out more quickly rather than not. Having something like Ice coverage would have been incredible, but alas, HP Ice has been cut. As it is, we can move on to Obstagoon, with much the same set as the last time we squared off with Chad. Facada Knockoff, of course, our fifth taunt user, to keep on the pressure against the walls in particular, and Switcheroo in the last slot is a nice way to burn, say, Landorus or a Corviknight, or even remove an Eviolite from Chansey. Again, simple and straightforward, and if you haven't seen the theme of the team, it should be pretty clear when we arrive at Noivern, who is, of course, our sixth taunt user. Yes, everything on our team outspeeds Corviknight, outspeeds Chansey, and is packing taunt. If those two come, they will not be allowed to do anything, which could result in a big blowout if, for example, I can get Victini behind a sub, or I just take half of one of their HP bars with Super Fang, or it forces a bad switch and I Hurricane that Rillaboom. Hurricane is needed for the extra power against specifically Volcarona, with Roost needed for longevity, and Super Fang is a more aggressive neutral option. I spoke about how my transactions made me better against Chad overall, and Noivern really epitomizes that. I'm immune to Landorus' ground coverage, I resist Rillaboom stab, I resist both of Volcanion stab, I resist both of Volcarona stab. Truly a matchup god against the best of the best, which means I should be able to just sit in front of almost anything and hack away. Let's see how the game plan goes in the semifinals match against Chad. No Chansey or Corviknight in favor of Frostlash and Cinccino. I thought something like this might happen, and it will definitely make it tougher to set up with Victini, and lessens the usefulness of my taunt users, but not entirely. I guess I shouldn't have been calling out Chad so much on Chansey never going down all season and Corviknight always running Helmet. Now they aren't here. Spoiler alert, it's going to result in some misplays, but as always, I'll talk about them a bit in the battle and perhaps much more in depth in the post-game. For now, Zero Aura is probably my lead for anything, especially if we can get the rematch against Landorus. Good luck, have fun to Chad. Cinccino lead. Well, that's awkward. Cinccino gets U-turn, knockoff, of course all those multi-hit moves. What if it's banned again? But what if he leads with it? What if it's Scarf? That's definitely possible. Looking at this, there really are only two options. Stay in and click knockoff as Banded Tail Slap could KO, or swap right into Cobalion to punish with Helmet and take minimal damage. If it's U-turn coming out, staying in is a good play. Just about anything else, and I need to swap out, right? If I think he's Scarfed, which I do think he may be considering he's leading this, I don't think he'd want to lose this so quickly. Unless there's another Scarf, which could make U-turn more likely. May also fear close combat coming out here, but he may also be aware of a Helmet on Cobalion. But if you're worried about that, would he really lead Cinccino? All this to say, hindsight is 20/20, but I'm not really sure. Maybe I should have swapped out, but I did stay in to knock, which he also did, and we trade items. My Shucka for his Scarf. Would Cobalion have been better there? Maybe. Losing Helmet that early wouldn't be ideal, but being without an item makes me an awesome Frostlash check. which I definitely didn't consider at the time, and by staying in and attacking Centino becomes less necessary to check later with helmet anyways, so overall, yeah, I think I ought to have gone Cobalion and lost the helmet but gotten chip. Maybe it would have cost me later as I never confirmed the scarf, but well, I think we'll never know, and Blaze Kick will thankfully connect here as well to push Zero Aura into second place, one behind Rillaboom for the KO leader of the season, so you grab the early 6-5 lead. I'm not sure entirely what his game plan for that was, but maybe it would have been nice for him to keep that later. That's kind of why I was hoping maybe Blaze Kick could connect into, well, just about anything else. I don't think Volcanion could have possibly swapped in there, but getting that extra chip on something else would have been absolutely amazing. I probably would have preferred to see that rather than Centino go down, but that's alright. He has several options to revenge kill me here. Maybe it's a chance to quiver, maybe it's a chance to bring in Lando who fears nothing, maybe reveal another Scarfer. Instead, he just makes a smart play and goes into Rillaboom. Good stuff. Well, Cobalion doesn't need to check Centino anymore, so with only this and Frostlass left to check defensively, I guess I may as well go Cobalion. Grass Glide, sure enough. Whoa, that's a lot of damage. That's band damage, so we know he's locked in, and here's another curious decision perhaps, but I decide to, on the switch, set up rocks rather than Toxic the switch in. I guess that's probably fine, but for some reason I really wasn't thinking about Volcanion being a defogger. I don't even know what I was expecting from it, but I guess defog wasn't one of those things. Would have been nice to put a bit more pressure on it, especially if I could get up rocks later, and it has to come in while Toxic. Anyways, my only real reliable switch into this is going to be Noivern, who eats a flamethrower, using his boots, and of course he will get burned immediately, of course. That's honestly fine. It's just a little bit at a time. I frisked his boots, but for some reason I still didn't think about defog coming in, so talking about this a little bit, I roosted here in anticipation of taking another hit, or more likely him switching out into something else, and instead defog comes out to remove the rocks and terrain, which means that really should have been a taunt in that situation. I don't really see too much reason to do anything else. Maybe I would get a little more chipped from burn, but I could still swap in a Volcanion literally any time to come back and roost up again. And if that weren't enough, I grossly misjudged what Chad is trying to do here. Let's see the play first, and let's talk about why what happened. As instead of going for any move, I swap out into Obstagoon, who takes 70% from Volcanion's attack. So why did I swap out? Well, Flamethrower, as you saw, did a whopping 25%, and I promise he didn't have any better coverage than that on Volcanion. Noivern could stay in all day long with Volcanion, and though he didn't know my set, I could Super Fang pretty freely there, followed by the Hurricane more likely than not. Instead, I switched out, anticipating Chad to try and get a better matchup, especially the flying move more probably incoming, which would rule out the Goon's worst matchups of Rillaboom and Volcarona. Instead, he stayed in, as in his words, he didn't see any offensive pressure coming from Noivern yet to that point. And that's probably fair. If I just said that I didn't see any need to switch because he couldn't do anything to me, doesn't that mean I should have stayed in and gotten my free hit too? Super Fang, anything on his team aside from Frostlass would have been way superior to anything else I could get basically all game, with the obvious exception of a Victini sub. Instead, I threw it away to get Obstagoon burned, but with 30% and no chance of Oakwing Volcanion, I think that was the real misplay. I should have at least gotten what was in front of me into Facade or knockoff range first before swapping to Obstagoon. That was the real mistake here, and if I had at least done that, I could have gotten a knock that could have either followed up into another move or forced a strong one and his team into a bad position with a revenge KO. Instead, Volcanion is going to remain around half or so from a knockoff, and Obstagoon goes down to almost nothing. I misplayed this. I did. Hopefully that does a good job of explaining why it was a misplay, why the thought wasn't bad, but just executed maybe a turn too early. Imagine a world where I'd Super Fanged him to half and then gone out to Obstagoon on a Frostlass switch. Man. Instead, perhaps my best Frostlass answer is gone. And at full health, I would have loved to use Obstagoon to tank a Landorus hit and fire back, but that isn't a possibility anymore either. I really needed to think that through more. Anyways, Noivern has to come back in, and now he goes into Frostlass on the Super Fang. Imagine if that were Hurricane there. Oh, I didn't need to Super Fang. We'll probably talk about that later too, huh? Well, I don't have the best opportunity to do anything about Frostlass, especially if he's Scarfed, so I think I'll probably just hard switch into Cobalion as the best triple axle switch in I've got. Poltergeist, that makes sense. Maybe Zero Aura could have been a switch in there. That would have been cute. I could come in now even, but I'm a greedy boy and I want to get those rocks back up as Volcanion comes back in yet again. Stone Edge may not KO from here actually, so I'm going to go back into Noivern one more time as he defogs. We are in a bad cycle. Probably would have been nice to have Toxic there at one point, or maybe even taunted there in anticipation of defog to try and keep those rocks up for other things like the Frostlass to chip down. I don't know. My Cobalion is going to be taking more and more chip that I just cannot afford, and probably couldn't afford it to this point even, as it makes it very tough to swap in on Rillaboom anymore. I need to do something big here, so I do need to Hurricane, I think, and that is going to come out into the Frostlass to bring it down to 40%. Here is a big turn. Aside from realizing that this Frostlass would be gone if I had Hurricaned earlier, which, yeah, I know. I think it's more likely he triple axles this time, right? So maybe I could just Hurricane again. Why would he be switching this in anyways? As an offensive check here, I realize it's probably a better offensive check than I'd first thought. Choice Scarf would make an awful lot of sense, and I took my time on this turn thinking about what happens if it is. Cobalion is an amazing play if I anticipated the multi-hit move. If he hits all 3 times, it KOs it back. He's just got to be wearing those glasses. If he goes Poltergeist, Zero Aura is a great play. Or maybe as a follow-up to see if he'd stay in on Cobalion if he survives. Free knockoff. Of course, if he isn't Scarfed, this is a free Hurricane. If he is Scarfed and I stay in, is it the end of the game? Well, Noivern sits in front of literally everything else except Rockslide Lando, and maybe some of Rillaboom's attacks. But what opportunity does that open up? I stayed in here and attacked, knowing that if he is Scarfed into Triple Axle, I have an incredible resist that can take full advantage of it. But is that worth risking the Noivern? My thought after the match is no, I should have risked either the Zero Aura or the Cobalion. Probably the latter. But this is the timeline we're living in. I stayed in. Noivern goes down to 2 hits of Triple Axle. But Victini will come in and sub up on the switch out. With Volcanion coming in, Bolt Strike will of course be the KO, and we are tied 4-4. But it feels like we're far ahead at this point. I'm going to claim another KO this turn. It's up to Chad to decide what. Frostlass I thought made a lot of sense, guaranteed to be faster, and it breaks the sub most of the time with Poltergeist, of course, only whenever it misses. Only I had a nagging thought in the back of my head. It told me, click sub again. Why? I really didn't know, but I saw the KO in front of me and clicked Bolt Strike, knowing a switch out isn't going to do anything for him. But he clicks Scarf Destiny Bond, which apparently works behind a sub. Victini's reign of terror is cut short. 3-3. This was a monumental turn. As I said, I thought he was just sacking something to break the sub, but instead Victini goes down, only getting 2 KOs. The significant part here is the KOs it did get were Volcanion and Frostlass, which were already weakened. In my pregame, I noted that Nidoking was designed to beat one of Landorus or Volcarona. Victini was supposed to take down the other one. What are my odds to Volcarona and Landorus now? Nidoking takes 1 out, but Zero Aura doesn't do much to either, and doesn't do much at all, honestly. Why did Victini have to go down like that? If it hadn't, I could have sacked Zero Aura or the Revenge KOing Lando and gone Nidoking probably. Now what? Actually, Landorus would have been tough to deal with either way, honestly. Another reason why I really needed to go to a different team member on Frostlass as Triple Axle is Noivern could have played the Earthquake game and gotten it in range of a tag team effort at least. I sacked Noivern. Really? Well, the only thing to stop Lando from getting KO right now is going to be Nidoking. So no reason to sack Zero Aura. If it's Volcarona, I should still be able to KO. Anyway, speaking of, here it is. I really can't swap out now. Maybe I could have gone Zero Aura. No, I needed to stay in and claim the KO. Volcarona with Flamethrower will do 40% to me, no burn, and Rockslide does KO back. 40% is actually quite a bit. Turns out Volcarona was max special attack. That matters. The Lander is coming in. Means Earthquake is actually a roll in my favor. 53% to 63% is the damage calc. I don't have any other way to take down Landorus. Ice Beam needs to KO him here. Earthquake, Shuckleberry. I do not survive. The follow-up Zero Aura Desperation knockoff will reveal that he was an expert belt, meaning with max stack investment, that was in fact not a roll at all. Chad had me all the way there. Lando just has to click EQ a couple more times, and for the first time on this channel, we are eliminated in the playoffs. This time to Chad in the semifinals. GG to Chad. Really good game, honestly. Man, 3 losses in a row to Chad now between this match, week 4, and the quarterfinals of our last in-between season. I can at least relish the opportunity to pick apart my play here, as you can already tell, but Chad is something I need to solve. Or maybe it's my play against Chad. We've got to give him credit. I can't imagine anyone but maybe Steve has taken me down so many times in the league. I warned you at the beginning of the season, this is our toughest league yet. This is the toughest it's looked. And it was a blast to participate in yet again. But before we wrap up the season, we need to dig in again to the impacts these plays had on this decisive match. Swapping Cobalion into Cinccino could have very much been the play, turn 1, again, as a way to totally wall Frostlass. Here, let's just reset and take a look at the turns that I'm talking about as we go into them. But Cinccino itself, was about to become a big problem too. Even if I had switched into Scarf Frostlass, Scarf Cinchino could have blasted Noivern with Rock Blast or Tail Slap, moves that Victini wouldn't have liked either, especially when it's trying to set up a sub. Honestly, I don't know how much Zero Aura is going to do in the match compared to everything else that would have been threatened by Cinchino, so I'm ultimately A-okay with my decision to stay in. Ironic that last match against Chad, I criticized myself for switching out turn 1, then debated whether I should have switched out turn 1 in our very next matchup. Going to flash ahead to turn 4. That was probably my bad on not identifying Volcanion as a defogger. Pretty silly, honestly, and Toxic should probably have been the play no matter what to get a timer on anything switching in like Lando or the Volcanion. I just assumed the rocks would stay up. My bad. We've talked a bit about the Noivern switch into Obstagoon, but what would have happened if I had stayed in and Super Fanged here? Or even taunted there to make sure that the rocks wouldn't go away. That could have been very interesting too, yeah. If I had stayed in Super Fanged on this turn instead of swapping into Obstagoon, I'd be down to about 70% or so, Volcanion to about 50% or so, and in range of a multitude of attacks. From there, I would either Roost or Hurricane, I think, or make the switch into Obstagoon then, and he would have been much more likely to swap and make my Hurricane or Obstagoon switch that much more impactful. Imagine if I had swapped into Obstagoon as he went into Frostlass this turn, and then I doubled out into the Cobalion to get all that triple axle Rocky Helmet recoil chip. That could have been pretty nice. That could have been very interesting. Adding on to that, if I'd clicked Toxic on Volcanion earlier, we'd be in a world where Volcanion was down to 64% before I even Hurricaned once. With Toxic ticking away, that would have been a great time to go into Obstagoon, as at that point, it was either Roost stall it out or swap. Without the Toxic, yes, Super Fang was definitely the play. Something else I've never been touched on, I didn't click Taunt, which again, I definitely should have done with Noivern instead of Roost on this turn. It would have made the follow-up Roost a bit better and maybe done enough chip in the match to make an impact later. I could have also taunted with Cobalion, specifically the second time I set rocks, I think would have been a fantastic time. That would have been a much more obvious time to click Taunt. As he knew that Noivern was my switch in, he saw how little it did to Noivern on that switch. That second time, I really should have been taunting with Cobalion and then swapped into Noivern, I think. Maybe I could have fit Protect onto something. Could have been nice, too, to kind of scout things out a little bit. I knew at least one Choice Scarf was coming, but I'm getting off track. If I'd kept Obstagoon healthy, I could have done something like sack into Lando later to get off a hit or a burn, or in an endgame scenario possibly survive a Rillaboom hit and burn it back. The burn would have been pretty helpful. Imagine an endgame scenario with Obstagoon as well, where I sack Zero Aura Nidoking to Lando, and then bring in Obstagoon. Switch over to the Flame Orb, maybe onto Rillaboom. It feels like that would have been at least a full differential closer. Maybe not a W, but closer. The only way that endgame was being won, honestly, was me knocking off Lando before Nidoking comes in, while also preserving a way to beat Rillaboom, which just wasn't happening unless I had another Mon in there, like that Obstagoon that could have been around full health, or Noivern. Yeah, the big play is sacking Noivern. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit to this, yes. Really, I wanted... So, going over Noivern, it walled Rillaboom very effectively. You know, I'd have loved to trade most or all of its health for, say, half of Landorus's health as well. This really was it. I had the right mindset of a KO leads to Victini setting up, but unfortunately I did not follow through on the thought of which KO leading to Victini setting up was optimal. Keeping Nidoking alive in the back was good. That was pretty obvious, I think. But Cobalion and Zero Aura, well, Zero Aura was a Poltergeist check with no item and could at least land a knockoff on anything but Rillaboom, but really wasn't the greatest Mon at that point in the match. Cobalion could come in too on an easy triple axle prediction. I could even set rocks again if triple axle hit once or twice to leave Frostlass alive, and it also has better follow-up later in the game too, being faster than Landorus and hitting it with a Stone Edge or Toxic, pretty similar to what Zero Aura could do, but more importantly landing the rock move on Volcarona as well, and being a much better wall to Rillaboom. So going into one of those two were probably the better plays, ones that I definitely regret the most. In a similar endgame scenario, let's say Victini and Noivern are alive instead of Cobalion. We're in such a better spot. Noivern and Victini resist most of what Rillaboom could throw out. V-Crate is incredibly spammable, especially on Rillaboom, and with Nidoking taking care of one Mon, Noivern and company should definitely have been able to handle the others with relative ease. That's the way the cookie crumbles, that's the way the game went. The above Mega Set seemed decidedly sloppy, but we still had an awesome shot at the victory if only Chad hadn't added the boosting item to Landorus. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but I think probably if I was to pinpoint the absolute best play at this point that we see on screen with Noivern against the 40% Frostlass, it would have definitely been to go into Cobalion. The upside of it going for triple axle and being able to set up rocks and then follow up with a taunt on a possible defog would be just too much. With Volcanion relatively low from the Obstagoon hit, there is really nothing that it could possibly defog on later as well. If we just sit in front of it with Cobalion and click Taunt, as long as Frostlass got one hit of triple axle off on the Rocky helmet, that means that it could not possibly switch in again on rocks, which I think was definitely the best case scenario for me. That is definitely what I needed to be doing, is try to get a way to force those rocks in with the taunt. We'll get that little tiny bit more chip of Frostlass on, but that is not the possibility that I saw at the time, which is super unfortunate because looking back on it, that would have been absolutely sick. So again, we're going to move back to the end game here. Maybe we'll talk about the Victini play a little bit, but if Lando went down to Nidoking Ice Beam, Rillaboom may not have been able to take on all three of my remaining Mons, especially a locked in Tui move, and with Rocky Helmet left in Cobalion. Grassy Glide means playing well with Cobalion. High horsepower means getting chipped with Zero Aura. Anything would have spelled the end, but that's not how it went down. Chad prepped well, played well, though I still think he should have swapped out of Volcanion on the turn I went to Obstagoon. Big props to him. Big props to him. 10-0 on the season with only the finals left to go. For the first time on the channel, we won't be showing the finals. But don't forget to check out the Wooper Club League page. The link is in the description as always, where you will find plenty of Wooper Club League content, including the finals match, where we can see if Chad can finish the second ever undefeated run after my run in season 4, or if Elfells will finish with a 10-1 season. That only loss coming at the hands of yours truly. The Boufflants still have their hands all over the finals and all over the season, frankly. Let's just take one more look back at this memorable season by going over the team one last time. The elephant in the room is the big 4 transaction moment between weeks 6 and 7. Down to 2 and 4, I very much needed to salvage my season, and the Mons I traded in and out, well, I think the jury's still out on whether or not I made positive trades or trades that negatively affected the team. To our fallen members first. Cramorant. Jeez, I just couldn't find the time to bring this thing. It doesn't have the bulk to do what I wanted most of the time, and a Scarfer spec set isn't enough whether when opponents had too many easy water resists, or were just too fast, or too bulky overall. Could I try it again? Maybe, but definitely not for a bit. Flareon was okay, I guess. Maybe if I hadn't gotten frozen in week 2, I could have seen the potential of a defensive set, but that dream was taken away too soon. Decent Guts attacker, mostly against a slower team. I could see myself revisiting this, but I'm also currently very high on getting a good fire type in a higher tier than this, so probably not in this environment. Bulu was honestly disappointing. I just couldn't justify bringing in enough, and that ultimately cost it. The coverage was okay, the speed was middling, and our opponent could bring a lot of answers to it. Maybe without Zero Aura, opponents would be more incentivized to bring bulky waters, but in the Steam composition, it couldn't hack it. Speaking of, Latias. I was adamant about Latias being equal in value to Latios in draft. Maybe it is, but I sure look a fool now, don't I? Latias similarly had troubles, especially with fairies, and even providing a crucial ground immunity, it just didn't come often enough. The problem may be with power creep overall, and Latios may need to be looked at too. Ultimately, this was a failure on the composition of the team. As you should see in my 8-bit drafts Season 6 Week 2 match, which should be up soon, Latias thrives and survives with a bulkier team composition than this. More Mons with more defensive potential and synergy with Latias, things like Swampert or Miltank or Moltres or Caesar, or multiples of those Mons, honestly. In this comp full of pivoting, but with more offensive prowess than defensive, Latias could not shine. I want to try Latias again with the team comp. It would have to be, let's just say, a little more annoying overall, because this one wasn't. Anyways, let's talk about the team we finished with and overall more raw thoughts concerning their performance and how I gelled with them rather than reading from a script. Rotom at the bottom there at tier 40. I do still really like the Rotom forms. Maybe base 91 speed just isn't enough for Rotom. Maybe if this was 101, I would be so tempted to bring it more often. But as it is, tier 40 seems just about right for it. It could have a lot of tricks and such, but like Cramorant, it just wasn't going to be bulky enough to do some of those things that I wanted. It has a lot of tricky ideas and sets, but I don't think it's quite good enough to really bring reliably. Claydol, it was a rapid spinner, it was a ground immunity, it was a rock resist, and that's really all I needed or wanted to be able to show or threaten. There are just so many things that hit it hard, super effectively. It doesn't have recovery, and it doesn't hit back hard enough, and it can't do everything that I want or need it to do. Claydol it's disappointing all the time. Frankly, though, the one time I brought it actually did pretty decently. That was about the one matchup I can imagine this whole season that it could have done well. Luckily, we were able to bring it to that. Tangela, you know I love my boy Tangela. The one time it showed up was a Barraskewda check, which was awesome. Very crucial to beating the team that only lost once up until the finals. We'll see. You're going to go check out the Wooper Club League channel to see if he won or not. Tangela, I love Tangela. Maybe should have come in the semi-finals week as a Landorus answer because I was so highly anticipating a physical set. but I just couldn't justify it with all the fire types. I don't think I could have made the room for it. Frankly, I should have just played the semifinals match better, and maybe we wouldn't have to be in that situation. And then we'll see, maybe against Alphals I could have brought Tangela yet again, though that was the one matchup I really didn't want to have to do yet again. The toughest matchup in draft is the one rematch where you already won. However, against Chad, I changed my team so much that maybe that kind of nullified things a little bit. But moving on to the Hailcore, Vanillix, and Arctivish, wow. Wow, you see on the right side there, 13-1 from Arctivision in 4 appearances, and one of those, it was just part of a big Darmanitan sweep, reverse sweep, which was pretty brutal and painful, and I really don't want to talk about it anymore. So Vanillix, as a hail setter, was fantastic. Blizzard is somewhat spammable. I know every week they're just going to be bringing the steel type check, but still, Vanillix is so strong, and we actually got to see in the quarterfinals how nice it is just to be able to have the hail there to set up for something, and that was absolutely awesome. I loved seeing Vanillix go to town like that. Just all season, be able to set up Aurora Fail multiple times in the season, just set up hail for Arctivish for 80 tier 80. That's pretty nice. A lot more utility than maybe people would have thought. Taunt came into play. What a cool mon. And Arctivish, the boy. 13-1. Oh my goodness, more bulk than you'd expect. Fish's Run hits so hard. It's actually got decent coverage between things like Icicle Crash, Freeze Dry, Rock Slide, Stone Edge, Super Fangs, Psychic Fangs. Wow, this is definitely a season that will live on in Wooper Club League memory for sure, that Arctivish was an absolute monster. Loved putting the little hail core together. A season after having a full rain team in our mono-type league, so I could definitely be seen going for this yet again. I think this is also kind of interesting that I drafted these two at about the same time that we saw the trend in Alolan Ninetales and Arctozolt in Sword Shield OU at about the same time. We see the mini Hail Core actually rising in effect in the actual OU meta as well. So we're just kind of showing the power of Hail. Way back when I first started in Gen 4, competitive, I ran Abomasnow Hail stall teams with things like Tentacruel and Walrein to great success, making top 100 on the ladder multiple times. That was so fun, and Hail will always be near and dear to my heart, probably even more so now with a whole new memory to think about and to see here in our 3rd season on the channel. We're going to move on to Obstagoon next. Oh, what a total mixed bag this was. Brought 7 times, fainted 6 times, but also got 7 KOs. But 4 of those KOs came in the same match. I feel like I didn't use Obstagoon particularly great. Obviously that one match I did, but there were too many times, as we especially saw in the semifinals, where I just kind of brought it in hoping to get the burn, and it was not safe enough. Probably to the opposite effect that Steve of the Wobbuffets misused Conkeldurr by bringing it in raw way too many times and just having its Flame Orb knock off. This, for me, I was trying to force the Flame Orb on a switch a little too often as well. I think there were some cool ideas I had with Obstagoon. Brought Choice Band, brought Choice Scarf, 2 of those 7 times. But I think I could have played it a lot better. Obstagoon is genuinely a very good mon. Tier 100, maybe 120 would be maybe a little better suited for Obstagoon. And I think I just didn't use it quite as well as I could have. Still, really appreciated having it. Really cool option on the team at all times, but as we'll talk about a little bit later, maybe a little redundant with some of the other team members too. Noivern was something that I got in a trait as well. Used all 5 matches that I could bring it, and a couple times it didn't look like it did anything, but just having Frisk, just having the ground immunity, having the dragon typing, I think it was awesome. It was very similar to what Latias would have been doing anyways, but for 60 fewer points, which let me upgrade, say, into Victini. And I think that was definitely a fair trade-off for me. Noivern, I would love to use again later. It may not have the most special attack, but we have some things that we didn't reveal that we could be doing with Noivern. Frisk was awesome. The speed was awesome. The resistances were great. Just the move pool, everything about Noivern I really enjoyed and liked. It's not too much of anything, and such that Tier 100 is probably fair for it. I enjoyed it a lot. I want to use it again at a different point. Hopefully not sack it off when I see that it can wall basically the entire rest of my opponent's team. We don't have to talk about the semifinals anymore, do we? It is still the semifinals match video, so I guess so. We're going to move on to Cobalion then, which I brought 9 times out of 11, which only results in 4 KOs and 6 deaths, but I thought it was an awesome glue piece. The steel typing was fantastic. On a base 120, or tier 120 mon, having a bulky steel type was pretty cool. It didn't really have recovery, and I liked running helmet more often than not, but I think there were still a lot of cool things it could do, physical and special. One big thing I think, we'll talk about this in a little bit, about how the top 4 mons are all weak to ground, right? That's such a big deal, I think, in team building and prepping for my opponent and everything. Kobalion, I think, was a perfect defensive piece with what I had originally, with things like Bulu and Latias. I think it was very good there, whereas Latias and Bulu weren't, strangely enough. And now that I've pivoted into this sort of team, Kobalion maybe loses a bit of effectiveness overall in the team composition. It was still good, but I'm not really totally sold on that. It was kind of cool to have a steel type, even if it didn't resist flying. I had Zero Aura, even if it didn't resist Psychic. I had things like Latias. No Fairy Resist was a little bit rough and forced me to rely on Nidoking, and that's also something I'll probably talk about in just a moment here too. But Kobalion overall, very cool mon for 120. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I thought it was. I used it relatively well. Being able to get rocks, Volt Switch. Man, this switching was very annoying. I loved Kobalion. Kobalion was very cool. Would definitely like to run it again. Nidoking in tier 140 again brought 9 times. We finished 8 and 3. I could definitely see me bringing Nidoking yet again. This thing was absolute boss, what a monster. But once again, with the team focusing more, I think, hyper-offensively and with all these ground weaknesses, maybe at this point in the season, Nidoqueen probably would have been a little better. Looking at the calcs too, and even in that last battle, Nidoqueen would have actually survived that Earthquake more often than not, and would have been able to KO back. So Nidoqueen over King would have been more useful there, strangely enough, and maybe having a more bulky, solid Fairy Resist would have been better. And that could have been true throughout the whole season, honestly. But Victini bringing in a decent Fairy Resist finally at the end, it was pretty nice. But Nidoking was so strong, so powerful. We saw it go to town in the final week of the season with a substitute set. We've seen it blow apart the Tangrowth Heatran core. Nidoking only going down 3 times in 9 brings. What a total Chad. I loved Nidoking, love the power that it brings. Again, maybe a bit redundant, but again, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I'm going to skip Zero Aura for now as our number 1 pick. We're going to go to Victini, which I didn't bring 1 time out of the 5 weeks that I had available. Wow, a bunch of versatility, very strong, very strong. Really enjoyed it. I've mentioned before, I love having the high tier fire types now. I think that's really awesome, being able to force a bunch of pressure onto the steel types that frequent this metagame. As we see, the top 4 may all be weak to ground, but they also all really harshly threaten the steel types. And I think that is very important in draft as well. Something I want to play around with a little bit more. Victini, yeah, I only had it for 5 weeks and bring it once. I would love another chance at it. Victini, you are more than welcome to come back. V-Crate is so strong. I want to play around with that more for sure. Loved the U-turn, shenanigans, everything about it was very cool. And finally, Zero Aura, number 1 pick. Brought 11 times. It did finish with 14 KOs, which did end up being second in the league, only to Rillaboom, just 1 behind Rillaboom. I didn't mention it, but Arctivish did tie with about 4 or so other mons for the 3rd place in the kill leaders. I want to say it was number 1 in KD. I'm actually going to go off script here just a little bit probably and check that out. But as I'm doing so, I do want to mention Zero Aura as the number 1 pick for me. Not bad at all. I did enjoy using this quite a bit. It was something I could kind of build around. It was a set that I always wanted to keep in mind. As a quick look, Dusty Arctivish tied for first in KD with Rillaboom, who was 15 and 3, so we both finished with plus 12. Was Zero Aura something that I could build around? Most of the time, actually kind of yes. I kind of got into the hang of it a little bit later on in the season rather than early. You may have seen in week, I want to say maybe 3 or so, our power rankings video in the Wooper Club League. I talked with Chad and a little bit, and he had asked me if Zero Aura had been worth it. To that point, I don't think it was. However, I think it really started to come into its own a little bit later, maybe even after getting rid of the grassy terrain, which was kind of interesting, or somewhere around week 6 or so, or 5, 7, somewhere in that range. I really started to figure out how to use Zero Aura best and which holes it needed to plug into the team. So I think rather than being something to build around, it may be something that I can kind of adapt it a little bit. I can come up with 1 or 2 specific Zero Aura ideas that it needs to have, and then kind of build and adapt it around the team that way. To that effect, with its giant speed stat as well, taken into consideration, yes, I do think it's still worthy of a first-round pick in our league. It was awesome to see it go to town whenever it could. Things like the bulk up set were very cool, very awesome. It has a lot of versatility, just does a lot of damage with electric attacks, faster than just about everything that our opponents could possibly bring. Yeah, I'd say I'd recommend this to just about anyone who wants to try out something a little fun. I don't think it's as easy to use as I had anticipated, and maybe I still didn't get the full hang of it by the end, but I did enjoy it significantly. So I love the team overall. However, we have to talk about the 2 big things. One is the big ground weakness. Victini, Zero Aura, and Nidoking, Kobalion at the top are all weak to ground. with only Noivern, Tangela, Claydol, and Rotom being the resistor immunities, which that may sound like 4 and 4, but consider that the top 4 are all weak to it, and the bottom 3 are 3 of my 4 resists or immunities, which are just not likely to come. I kind of like the idea of leading my opponent into doing something like that, thinking, oh, I have to bring my ground types, but I don't think that I could execute on that particularly well. I will kind of want to see it done in maybe in a different way. If I could force my opponents to bring ground types and then have something like Celesteela or something like that could totally abuse anything that's going to be packing ground coverage, right? Maybe something like that would have been a way to pivot a little better. And to go with that, I think the other big issue is how just hyper-offensive this team ended up being. I mentioned it in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs in particular, that I very much went with a hyper-offensive style where I would not allow my opponent to any room to breathe. I think I was kind of forced into that style, very much so, from the transactions that I made by getting rid of a couple of the walls. I replaced one of the walls with Tangela, which just isn't a high-tier mon. I replaced one of the walls with Victini, which can kind of be a wall, but it doesn't have recovery and has V-Crate, so of course it's going to be offensive. Having Nidoking over Queen, and still being able to have that set up, T-Spikes or Rocks, combined with Rocks, and being only somewhat of a defensive piece, but more so something to set up into something else with them, like Volt Switch or a Smart Double. I think I ended up going much more hyper-offensive than I had anticipated. I think nothing exemplifies that more than probably the Hail Core, but also looking at Nidoking and Obstagoon. Those mons just do nothing but shred holes in teams. I think maybe I had too many of those types of mons on top of each other. It looks like it could have ended up working potentially, but I don't know if that's what I had necessarily been going for at the beginning, and that's just kind of what it turned into, which I thought was kind of neat. I think I ended up doing okay with that style, especially considering that after the trade deadline, I did rip off 4 straight, pretty convincing wins consecutively, including one against one of the finalists here. But I don't know if that's a style that I would want to do again. I would like to explore maybe a little bit more. Ultimately, I enjoyed the season. I had a lot of fun with it. Obviously, I didn't do as well as I wanted, but I still finished over 500, 6-5 overall, and a semi-finalist. So I think for most that is a success. But for us, it is a step back. 5 losses in the season overall compared to 2 in the previous 2 seasons combined. I know Johns, but I did have to prepare a little differently this season without the ability to easily access data at work, but the ultimate failures fall on me, or I guess maybe the league as a whole has just improved. But at least a couple of the season's losses were on me. Thank you to the league once again for having me. I really hope to shine in our off-season league. I'm excited to see the changes in Season 10 as we manipulate tiering yet again, anticipating the release of a new metagame with the Gen 4 remakes. That'll do it for me this season. We've got plenty of Draft League content if you're curious, and feel free to let me know down below what you think about the league, the team, and the videos in general. I'm always looking for suggestions on how to improve, so please leave some feedback, and we'll make it happen. See ya.